My thoughts on the Craft legacy. Let's get this out of the way first. I'm a huge fan of 1996's The Craft. I rented it from Blockbuster as often as possible, and to this day, it remains one of my biggest sources of style inspiration. It's one of those movies that I rewatch when I'm feeling down, and every single time I'm reminded of what made me love it so much in the first place. When they announced that a sequel film was in the works, I won't deny that I was pretty upset by the decision. What else could you add to this story that wasn't already said in the original? Have we learned nothing from Mean Girls 2 and every other awful sequel? Because I'm a glutton for punishment and simply couldn't help myself, I decided to watch the sequel, The Craft Legacy, anyway. And here's the thing. There are some things that I actually did like about the film. I know, I'm just as surprised as you are. But these few positives in no way outweigh its shortcomings. Today, I'll be talking about the Craft Legacy film, and just a warning, there will be spoilers. Let's get into it. The Craft Legacy begins with a group of 3 girls performing a ritual to summon a 4th person to complete their coven. There's a lot of babbling and expositing going on, differing from the original film that had the same exact scene, but it came off as foreboding instead of funny. During the scene, we learn that one of the girls is prone to lighting things on fire, one is obsessed with telepathy, and that they want to be able to stop time. I wonder if that'll come back later.
I want to freeze time.
We couldn't even freeze time if we had a voice.
Watch out! You're always setting things on fire, bro.
I mean, it's like, how many times have we tried to telepathically communicate?
Oh my god! You're obsessed with telepathically communicating.
After the title card, we meet our protagonist, a young girl named Lily who is moving into the home of her mother's new boyfriend, who I'm simply going to refer to as David Duchovny throughout this video. As we quickly learn from her trendy teen speak and approval of underage drinking, Helen isn't a normal mom. She's a cool mom.
Oh, look at we're having all the feels.
And David is totally gross. I wish they'd at least attempted to hide the fact that he was going to be the villain, but the second he called the mom a little birdie 3 times in a row, I knew what was coming.
Little birdie told me midship was your favorite.
Isn't that right, little birdie?
My beautiful little birdie.
Guess what this guy does for a living? He goes around writing books about a crisis in masculinity and talking to men about the need to, quote, man up. If you couldn't tell yet, this movie's overarching message is going to be fuck the patriarchy and hashtag girls get it done.
Girls do get it done.
Later that evening, when Helen, Lily's mom, asks her about her first day of school, this little scene occurs.
Are you excited? Can meet some new friends.
Well, that would imply that I had old friends.
Oh, well, there's gonna be D-bags no matter where you go, right?
It is the first example of what is doomed to make this film inferior to the original. Too much information and yet, ironically, not enough. When Sarah from The Craft shows up to her new school and is acting awkwardly, we organically discover why. She's mourning the loss of her mother, previously tried to commit suicide, and has strange powers that she can't explain. When Lily says she didn't have friends at her previous school, we're just left wondering why. She doesn't seem to have any deep-seated issues other than not knowing who her father is, and the characters write it off as the people at her last school being, quote, D-bags.
It's douchebags.
Douchebags? I was going for dick bags.
Oh.
Why not hint at it in the car that she was bullied at her last school if that's what you were going for? Have her be excited about a fresh start. Instead of being able to focus on the blatant foreshadowing that is, quote, there are D-bags at every school, we're instead left with unanswered questions. When Lily suddenly gets her period at school, which is the catalyst for her ostracization, she not only doesn't realize that it started, but she doesn't notice the giant amount of blood that's pouring off of her seat and onto the floor. Not only would my cramps have told me my period was coming days before it even started, but I for sure would have noticed if my butt was sopping wet, in jeans especially. If this had been a first period situation, like in Carrie, maybe it'd be more believable, but there's no indication that that's the case. The reactions from the rest of the class are equally as unbelievable. The boys hoot and holler, causing a ruckus and making jokes, but a real high school boy would panic. Sure, they'd probably say it was gross, but they'd by no means continue to draw attention to it and say ridiculous one-liners. I've met grown men who are still squeamish about periods, and I'm supposed to believe an entire class of teens wouldn't be. I would have found this entire situation much more believable if she'd simply stood up to maybe answer a question on the board or go to the bathroom, and it was slowly revealed that she had a small blood stain on the back of her jeans. It would have felt more organic and not like such a blatant attempt to create drama. Also, the teacher just ignores this entire situation. Why not have him tell the boys to be quiet after Lily runs off to the bathroom and then awkwardly ask some of the girls in the class to go check on her or something? It'd give Frankie, Tabby, and Lou a reason to leave the room and see her. What's so disappointing about how this entire thing plays out is that it was written by someone who should know how menstruation works. The idea of someone getting their period and having other people ridicule them for it isn't a new concept, but it doesn't have to be. If you menstruate, odds are you're going to leak at one point or another. It's inevitable and it should be normalized. So while I do appreciate that the film decided to use a very real thing that many people experience, I hate that it didn't portray it realistically, which is something we're going to see happen a lot in this film. Afterwards, when the girls go to lunch, already on their way to becoming fast friends, we're once again given excessive information. Unlike the original film, where Sarah is hesitant to befriend the rest of the girls because she'd heard rumors about them being witches, in this film, they just come out and say,
"You can sit with us if you want." Not that anybody really wants to sit with us anyways.
Not only is this information not relayed to Lily more organically by someone else, perhaps a mean girl at school if they wanted to go that route, the girls don't explain why they're disliked. As they walk through the cafeteria, everyone looks at them like they've grown another head, when all that's happened so far is that Lily got her period like 20 minutes earlier. No one seems to know that the other girls are witches, so exactly what have they done that's made everyone hate them so much? At least in the original film, we understand why the three girls are friends with each other prior to Sarah's arrival. They're all outcasts for separate reasons, and that's what brings them together outside of witchcraft. Rochelle is the only black girl in the whole school. Nancy is poor, and Bonnie has scars all over her body. And while each of the girls in Legacy have the potential to have interesting backstories, we never get to see them. Lou is trans, but we never see her being mistreated because of this. Yes, we could infer that it's happened before based off of how misogynistic male characters have been so far, but it's something that requires a lot of thought on the audience's part. Tabby says she wishes she had more black friends, but we've seen plenty of other black kids at the school, and she hasn't been on the receiving end of any racism like in the original film. The only person who gets dialogue that might reference why she's disliked is Frankie, who at a party is told she isn't pretty. But the line comes out of nowhere and is delivered by a drunk girl, instead of one of the many boys in the movie.
Super cool to shame other girls. You're the best.
It's so sad that you, try to look pretty.
If the whole point of the film was to say that the patriarchy is toxic, why would you have a female character deliver a misogynistic insult? It's also during this lunchroom scene that the girls begin to suspect that Lily is their fourth and a fellow witch. Not because of any sort of gravity-defying pencil spinning, it's just that she has a necklace with a rune that's featured in their spellbook. The following day at school, Lily is once again harassed by Timmy, the same boy from the period incident, and she winds up using her powers to get him away from her, promptly landing them both in detention. While she's in detention, the girls use telepathy to tell her to meet them, which confirms their suspicions that she's the person they've been waiting for. Unlike a normal person who's never dabbled in witchcraft before, Lily takes this all incredibly well, not at all freaking out about the telepathy that happened earlier, except to say,
What the hell, you guys?
The girls reveal that not only can they now speak to each other telepathically, but earlier they all used combined telekinesis to push Timmy off of her.
We all thought it at the same time.
Wait, what? Tell me you didn't think about throwing his ass off of you.
Although, during that scene in question, they're so far away they couldn't have possibly heard what he said. This is a pretty obvious ode to the original film, where the girls in the craft work together to hit a guy with a car, which they react to with glee, surprise, and fear. You know, a normal range of emotions a group of people would probably be feeling if they'd suddenly unlocked their magical powers.
I thought to myself, it's gonna hit him.
I thought it too.
Well, I thought it too, but that's
Sarah, did you think it?
Yeah. Shit. You guys, this is really weird.
Whereas in Legacy, the girls are just giddy and hyper. But I suppose that's consistent with the sillier tone of this film. Despite a lot of exposition explaining the different stages of magic, which was never explicitly mentioned in The Craft, we're never taught one of the craft's most important lessons, that everything and everyone has good and bad within them. What matters is keeping the balance.
True magic is neither black nor white. It's both because nature is both, loving and cruel, all at the same time. The only good or bad is in the heart of the witch. Life keeps a balance on its own.
In Legacy, the girls' main goals are simply to get to different stages of magic. Telekinesis, telepathy, stage 3 they actually keep a secret for no reason whatsoever, and the final stage is shapeshifting. It's at this point that Lily somewhat begins to panic, but not like Sarah, who actually leaves. Instead, Lily stands there as the girls ask her about her ancestry, and then drop even more information about elements and direction. This film loves exposition. Oh, and don't forget a light sprinkle of woo, girl power.
But you shouldn't run from your power. None of us should. We have superpowers without even trying.
Your flow is heavy, and that is something to celebrate.
It's at this point in the film that you realize this is not going to be a scary movie. There's no tension, no fear, no trepidation, just vibes. These girls have known each other for a few hours at most. But guess what? They've already increased their power level to the super secretive stage 3, stopping time, which, they already mentioned in the very first scene. I guess they forgot that happened. In The Craft, it's not until much later in the film, after the girls have bonded and grown closer, that they're even able to do more intense forms of magic. Whereas in Legacy, they just instantly succeed at everything they try and don't even bother making it subtle. Unlike the original film, where we get more and more excited as the coven's powers and friendship grow, in this film, we're just waiting for the next thing to happen. We don't even get to learn anything about the rest of the girls, their home lives, their struggles, nothing. And of course, in typical sequel, remake, reboot, etc. fashion, we're hit with a bunch of cheap references to the original film that don't do anything except make me want to turn this movie off and rewatch The Craft. The following montage is one of the film's biggest missteps because instead of giving us the opportunity to learn more about the girls and their magic, we speed right through it. We see them playing light as a feather, stiff as a board, fooling around with a Ouija board, putting on makeup, burning graffiti with their hands, bathing in sparkly water, stopping time in the school cafeteria, and learning to read auras. The latter is a neat little trick that I would have loved seeing used again for something important. Like, I don't know, noticing that David Duchovny is a bad guy? For some added tension, and also to help those in the audience not already in the know, David Duchovny lectures Lily about her fight from earlier with Timmy. Although at this point, that should have been weeks ago. He acts like a total asshat, refusing to listen to a word she has to say about the matter. That's right. He is a mean man.
Well, he whispered something in my ear and I was...
He whispered something, so you hit him?
Well, if you just let me finish...
When I am speaking, please don't interrupt me.
Okay.
Thank you.
He and her mother have an argument about this later, which leads to Lily going outside in the middle of the night where she meets one of her stepbrothers. That's right, a stepbrother. I haven't mentioned them prior to this point because they're honestly such useless characters. The three stepbrothers, whose names I can't be bothered to remember, are only there to set very specific plot points in motion. The youngest one is somewhat friendly to her, which leads to this half-assed bonding moment when their parents are fighting. The oldest is an asshole because of internalized homophobia and also sleepwalks, but that doesn't influence the film in any way, so I don't know why they added that. The middle one is not only best friends with Lily's future bully/love interest, but is also the guy Frankie has a crush on. The three of these boys combined barely have a personality, and I feel like wanting to add more toxic male energy to the story isn't good enough justification for their existence. This addition could have actually worked if we'd scrapped the oldest and youngest brothers entirely and taken bits and pieces of their storylines and pushed them onto the middle brother. Have him be the one who is secretly gay and in love with his best friend. Have him be a bully, and have him be the one who is eventually killed by David Duchovny. Not only would that clean up the story a bit, but it also show how toxic David's idea of masculinity is, that he'd even kill his own son for his agenda. And to make that even better, instead of Timmy, a random boy from school, being the ones the girls use their power on, have it be the stepbrother. Not only would it make the girls more horrified by his death because one of them actually had a crush on him, it'd also make their eventual turn on Lily more understandable. Because it's like, hey, not only did you use a love spell when you weren't supposed to, but you also used it on the guy you know your friend likes. Come on, movie, it was right there. The next day, which might actually be several days after they've put the spell on him, I don't know, time is weird in this movie, Timmy begins spouting feminist talking points and generally is more #woke. Which of course makes all of the girls attracted to him, because that's what we should be teaching men, that acting like you care about feminist issues is a surefire way to get girls interested in you. That definitely won't backfire in any way.
Catch you guys later. Girls. Women. Yeah. No, women with an X. All right.
If you compare this to how Chris, the bully/love interest from The Craft, acts, it couldn't be more different. Chris gradually grows more and more obsessed with Sarah, all the while seeming absolutely bewildered by his own actions. Which makes sense, because he's an asshole and treating a girl decently is something he would never do. And when his love for Sarah eventually culminates in him trying to assault her, it's totally in line with his toxic character.
The only way you know how to treat women is by treating them like whores when you're the whore, and that's gonna stop!
Whereas Timmy is immediately perfect and doesn't seem to be confused at all by his sudden change in personality. And all the girls, especially Lily, completely forget the type of person he was before. After a night partying at his house and bonding, Timmy becomes the 5th unofficial member of their group, hanging out with the girls at school and later at Lily's house. During a game of 2 truths, 1 lie, Timmy reveals that he's actually bisexual and has been struggling with the secret for some time. This is interrupted when Duchovny comes home, and for some reason the girls have to sneak out without him noticing. It's never explained why. Timmy's brutal honesty and his general new attitude causes Lily to develop a crush on him, eventually casting a love spell. Mere seconds later, he walks into her room and the two have a quick little makeout session. The following day, we're suddenly told that Timmy committed suicide the night before, and the girls immediately wonder if they had something to do with it, which prompts Lily to reveal that she'd put a love spell on him, something the rest of the girls take huge offense to, which I find particularly odd because they never said that type of magic was off limits, and Lily is significantly less versed in magic than they are. Plus, they'd already been using magic in lots of other ways, so what made this such a horrible thing to do? I can't even take this scene seriously because the other girls don't acknowledge that they're the ones who've influenced her to use her magic this way.
Was all of this just like some game to you? What? All of this work that we did together was about building trust, about building community, and not letting some stupid crush get in the way of everything we've been working to. Do you?
After some crying, the girls part ways, saying they should spend some time apart and not use their magic, leaving Lily all on her lonesome. During one of the visions/nightmares Lily's been having throughout the movie, she sees something that makes her suspect Duchovny isn't such a good guy. I don't really understand it because, like all of her visions, they make no sense. If we were so keen on using that as a plot device, could we have at least made it interesting? Have her mother send her messages in her dreams if we've already established that witch telepathy is a thing? Oh yeah, her mother? It's Nancy from The Craft. I appreciate the Fairuza Balk cameo, but there simply wasn't enough build-up to have it work in a way that didn't feel cheap. After Timmy's funeral, the girls decide to bind each other's powers, which is of course going to bite them in the butt shortly. Duchovny attempts to trick Lily into giving him her powers by shapeshifting into her mother, but she sees through him. And then his true warlocky self is revealed. But I have to wonder, if he can already shapeshift, why does he need Lily's powers? Timmy from Beyond the Grave uses a Ouija board to tell the rest of the coven that Lily is in danger. Because even in this film that is supposed to be all about female empowerment, we need a man to help save the day. Lily attempts to fight Duchovny on her own, only to discover that her powers have been bound. But that's okay, there's no need to fear, the coven is here! Lily rejoins the group, and after some cute and quirky apologies and a quick hug, they give her back her powers. Then, after this terribly placed callback to The Craft,
You girls ought to be careful in the woods at night. A lot of weirdos out here.
We are the weirdos, mister.
Girls, watch out for those weirdos.
We are the weirdos, mister.
they start fighting back using their respective elemental powers. It honestly reminds me of an episode of Avatar. I'm sorry. They eventually beat him because, duh, and Lily goes on to meet her birth mother. Everything is fine and dandy. Roll credits. Based off of that summary, you can probably tell that this film, while having potential, is riddled with flaws that could very easily be improved upon. While I discussed a lot of them already, let me ramble for just a little longer. I thought all of the actors in Legacy did their damnedest with the material they were given, but there were some who clearly didn't get as much attention as others, specifically Lovey Simone and Zoe Luna. We learn almost nothing about Tabby and Lourdes, despite the two of them having the most potential for interesting, heartfelt stories, which is a shame because a lot of the marketing for this film revolved around its, quote, diverse characters. Frankie is comic relief, although she comes off annoying more times than not. If they'd taken out a few characters, like the useless brothers, and dedicated the time spent on them to developing the girls and their friendship, it would have felt much more believable overall. Despite seeming to have a message that is all about female empowerment, the character who winds up with the most development is actually Timmy, and we're supposed to be happy about that? The only girl who gets any development is Lily, and even then, she's barely interesting. Instead of this being a cautionary tale about the dark side of power, it's about a group of teen girls playing with magic and the mean old man who wants to ruin their fun. One of my favorite things about the original film is that its core cast of witches, Nancy, Sarah, Bonnie, and Rochelle, were all fully fleshed out characters. They each had their own personalities, reasons for turning to witchcraft, and individual problems and struggles. Odds are you could relate to at least one of them, truly becoming invested in their story. Even just by looking at their clothes, you could tell who these girls were and how they were evolving as time passed. Look at Bonnie's wardrobe before her scars are healed, then look at her outfits afterwards once her appearance has gone to her head. Or what about Nancy, who from the very beginning of the film is depicted as more volatile, aggressive, and power-hungry. However, we as the audience don't hate her, at least not at the beginning, because we understand that Nancy acts this way because of a neglected home life, and she is nothing other than witchcraft. So the fact that Sarah wants to take that from her is terrifying enough to drive her mad. The nuances of Nancy's personality, from devoted friend to unhinged villain, are masterfully displayed and are what make her character so captivating to watch. None of the characters are perfect, and that's the entire point. People are flawed, and what makes the craft so interesting is the idea that when you, an imperfect person, are put in a position of power, what will you do with it? When watching Legacy, I was struck by how of its time it was. The language, the clothing, and lots of other little things.
Just like telepathically communicating with you, MBD.
JK, it's like a VBD for sure because now you're actually here and we on some shit IRL.
But after spending some time away from it, I realized, what's wrong with that? If you rewatch the 96 film, you'll realize it's the definition of a mid-90s grunge film, which is honestly part of the appeal for many of us, right? The music, the fashion, and ideologies are all impossible to ignore. And the 2020 film does the exact same thing. Sure, it'll feel dated in a few years, but a decade from now, I'm sure lots of people will feel nostalgic for this very specific time period. Now, I have to say something about the clothes. I think that for teens in 2020, the wardrobe is spot on. I know it's an easy comparison, but the styling reminds me a lot of Euphoria, which would make sense, since that TV show was hugely influential when it came to fashion for that demographic. It's much better than, say, The Kissing Booth, which dressed these supposed high schoolers like it was 2014. But, and it's a pretty big but, the clothes in Legacy don't do much for me in regard to storytelling. Other than the girls having obvious color palettes, green for Lou, orange for Tabby, etc., there's no change in their wardrobe as they become more powerful and grow into their own, which I suppose does actually make sense because the characters themselves hardly evolve. The girls are always trendy, more so than any of the side characters, which doesn't sell the idea that they're outcasts. Any girl who dressed like this, I would immediately want to befriend. And what about Frankie's leopard jacket? She wears it in nearly every scene, even when it's warm, but it's never explained why. I have questions, Legacy. I have questions! Yes, I'm giving them a bit of a hard time because I love the clothes and the craft, but I don't mind that Legacy didn't go the gothy grunge route. It wouldn't have fit the tone of the film. I just wish I'd been able to see a style evolution or something. Do I think that the craft Legacy should have been its own thing instead of a sequel to an already fantastic film? Yes, but that doesn't mean we should write it off immediately. It's a movie that those of us who grew up on the craft probably won't be obsessed with, but that's the whole point. We teens of the 90s and 2000s already had our witch movie. Let this new generation have theirs. What were your thoughts on the craft legacy? Did you like it or hate it? I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you soon. Bye!